Hi there, this is a talk on coping with anxiety. So, first off, I just want to talk a little bit about anxiety in general. And not all anxiety is bad. Anxiety is really what gets us going in the morning, usually, to get to work or to school or whatever we have to do. Um, and it's also probably the reason why a lot of people are experiencing increased anxiety right now is because we're out of our routines. But the truth is, you can't cure anxiety. And because you can't cure it, the only thing you can really do is manage it. And the goal of this talk is to help people identify triggers and maybe figure out a few coping skills. And coping skills are what we use to manage our symptoms. And understanding triggers is kind of the first step of how to deal with your anxiety. So, identifying triggers and learning to manage them, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what are the triggers for your anxiety? For some people, it's caffeine. For other people, it's, talking to your boss. But you just have to think about take some time to notice what is it that makes you get anxious. And then ask yourself of those triggers, if you were to write down all your triggers, like which ones do you have control over versus which ones are out of your control. For instance, right now, a lot of your anxiety might be coming from the pandemic. And, that's understandable, but you have to kind of think about what parts of it do you have control over, which is like, for instance, social distancing and staying home, you have control over that, but what parts do you not have control over, which are a lot of things. Anyway, once you think about your triggers, ask yourself, can you limit exposure to any of them? And sometimes the answer is yes. So if you tend to get really anxious when you drink coffee, don't drink coffee. You know, I love coffee and I don't care if it makes me anxious. But there's certain things that we put ourselves in a situation that makes us feel anxious. So if going into a crowded store makes you feel anxious, then maybe you should go during off hours or really early in the morning or at a time when you know it's going to be less crowded. And if you can't limit exposure, what are your coping skills? And so, yeah, that's the steps: building some insight into your triggers, learning to manage your triggers, and then trying new coping skills. So I'm sure people, therapists and other people talk to you about practicing focused deep breathing, which I know sounds a little trite, but it can be really helpful because one of the issues with anxiety is that we get really stuck in our head and we kind of forget that we have this whole body connected to our head. So the purpose of breathing and meditation and whatnot is really to kind of get out of our head and get back in our body. And we do a lot of grounding up exercises and other things that kind of get us from here back here. So when it comes to breathing to help with anxiety, it's really just like get out of your head and just focus on your breath. That's all it is. So there's a lot of different tricks. One of them is the 4-7-8 technique, and I've used this when I've woken up in the middle of the night and tried to get back to bed. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, and then you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then you exhale for 8 seconds. And if you keep doing that and really counting your breaths and focusing on your breath, it really does help you calm down. Another thing you can do while you're focusing on your breath is to visualize. So that can be like picturing in your mind an outcome of something that you want to happen in the future. You can also do guided imagery. So for a long time, I've done in counseling sessions, I've helped people kind of create a safe place. And mine was always a lake in the where I grew up that I would go and swim at. And so if I was feeling anxious or really wanted to feel grounded, I would close my eyes and think of myself sort of at this lake. And it was very calming to me. You can also do a lot of breathing exercises on apps, and I can talk about those later. Of course, exercise is a really good coping skill for anxiety. People that have anxiety tend to feel more anxious if they don't exercise. So that's a little tricky right now, and I've talked to several people who are saying that, my biggest coping skill for my anxiety was going to the gym, and so that's really tough for them when they can't go. So I just want to encourage you to find other ways to exercise. So if you can't go to the gym, which none of us can, go for a walk, take a run, go on a bike ride. A lot of us are like today's rainy, for instance. So if it's a rainy day and you can't do the first ones I'm talking about, then you can do yoga. I've been doing yoga with Adrienne, who's on YouTube. She's like this hippie chick from Texas, and she's great. So I've been doing that a couple days a week. Stretching. If you don't want to do formal yoga, which is basically stretching, then you can just stretch yourself. Calisthenics, which is basically any kind of movement that doesn't involve gear, basically. And then there's a lot of online exercise classes. There's tons of them. So, mindfulness meditation, I'm not going to go too deep into that, but it is a huge coping skill for anxiety. And it's also just something that's really big in the field of counseling psychology as a way of decreasing distress. And I'll tell you the kind of short and sweet reason why, which is that mindfulness meditation is about focusing on the moment, the present moment. So focusing on right now and not what happened in the past and not what happened in the future. And the reason why is because a lot of anxiety is people worrying about things that have yet to happen. And if we just focus more on what's happening right now, taking life minute by minute, day by day, then it's less stressful because we're not worrying about things we have no control over that are happening in the future. I also have heard from a lot of people that they find meditating to be intimidating, and it's because they think they literally have to sit there for hours on end in silence, which is ridiculous. So I would recommend meditating for short periods of time, and by that I mean do an app for 3 to 5 minutes, um, and then you can work up to doing like a 5 to 10 minute meditation every day. And the whole purpose of it, again, is to get out of your head and get back in your body, to notice your breath and to notice your thoughts, but not to follow your thoughts. So you might have thoughts while you're meditating and you just notice them instead of following them. Guided meditations might be a preferred method as opposed to unguided. I personally love guided meditations. I use a lot of the apps. Calm, Headspace, Mindfulness, Simply Being, Breathe. I have most of these on my phone. Some of them are free, some of them are subscription based. I totally recommend giving them a try. And again, only do 3 to 5 minutes at first. And you can do a body scan, which is one where they kind of go through the body and you focus on your head and then you go down your body. Loving kindness, which is a really good one where you kind of send love and kindness to yourself and to other people. There's actually on Calm, they have specific meditations for anxiety. So there's a lot of different ones you can do, but it's definitely worth a try. And then I'm not going to go much into this, but EMDR is one of my favorite coping skills. I think it's very effective. It's typically used for PTSD and anxiety. So yes, it's used for trauma, and anxiety isn't necessarily trauma-based, but it definitely works for anxiety too. And there's a phone app called Anxiety Release. It does cost, I think, $5 maybe, $4 or $5, but it's worth it, and I would recommend it for anyone that has high levels of anxiety. I have used it with several clients. I have them put on the earbuds and do it for about 10 minutes. And usually if I say beforehand, rate your anxiety, and they'll say, oh, it's at a 7, and then they'll do the app, and afterwards I'll be like, rate your anxiety, and they'll be like, oh, it's like a 3. So it can be very effective for calming you down. So, but just so you know a little bit about it, I would recommend you do a little research if you want to know more, because I'm telling you the very, very basics. It stands for eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing. You're asked to recall distressing images or the triggers of your anxiety. So if that's hard for you to talk about or think about, might not be a good choice. It's bilateral sensory input, so it has these stereo clicks in your ear. It's like click, 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 and then you can also follow with your eyes a light. I know that sounds weird. I've always said that it's like hypnosis meets meditation, but I don't know what to say besides that it can really work for some people. It desensitizes you to the stimuli that's being evoked. So if you are really triggered by the pandemic, you could do EMDR focusing on that, and it would kind of lower your response to it, lower your hypervigilance towards it. The other coping skill, which I think could be used just in general, is journaling and microjournaling. I have a whole talk on that in a different video and PowerPoint if you want to know more. I'm just going to tell you the basics. So journaling can be done in many different forms, but what I was talking about here is like you could write down the causes of your anxiety, basically to identify your triggers. And sometimes when you write things down, you get them out of your head and you get them on paper. So that can actually help decrease your distress because instead of thinking about it, you're writing about it. So journaling also helps people process events that happened in their life and to build insight. And a lot of what we do as counselors is try and help people build insight. So that's why it's actually useful to counselors when their clients journal, because they're kind of doing work. Building introspection is a coping skill. In other words, the more insight you build into yourself, the more introspective you are about yourself, the more you kind of understand why you feel the way you feel. Microjournaling is a focused and abbreviated form of journaling, and I would rather you watch my other video on it rather than me explain it here. Bullet journaling as well, and there's several phone apps that are used for that. I just put Dailyo there, but there's a bunch of them that you can check out. And relaxation. So basically, in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, we have this saying, distract, relax, and cope, which I have on a slide here. Relaxation is usually what you do after you've kind of distracted yourself with some of the other things we talked about, and then you try and relax. So the question is, what can you do to relax? I mean, there's a picture here of someone having a drink. I mean, that is certainly something you can do, but it's not always the best thing to do. So what can you do when you're cooped up in your house? Well, you can take a bath if you have a bathtub. You can use essential oils. I use a heating pad every night. That where the months are cold, I put it on and it kind of warms my back up, and I love that. You can do self-massage or trade massages with a household member. Self-massage would be using one of these little nifty tools like the head scratcher. Remember this guy? So that's self-massage. I definitely think if you're living with someone else, trading massages is a great idea. Listening to white noise, that sounds weird, but white noise is all over my house, partly because we have kids, but partly because white noises can be very calming, and it can also signify, in my house, it means go to bed. Drinking herbal tea can actually be really nice at night, especially, or really any time during the day. It can be very calming. Listening to relaxing music. I know this sounds super cheesy, but I've been playing Enya a lot. Because I think of Enya as like someone I listened to back in middle school, and she just chills me out. I don't know what to say. And I kind of need it right now because we're all living through the pandemic. I just want to talk briefly about some CBT skills, and then I'm going to talk more about some of these skills in a different PowerPoint. So the basic logic of CBT is like the way you think influences how you feel, and that influences how you behave, and it's very cyclical. So we do a lot of reality testing, questioning your thought pattern, why the way you think is, makes you feel the way you feel, and kind of questioning that. And also talking about negative thought patterns and spiraling, which a lot of us have that problem where when you start to think about something negative, it gets worse and worse, or you ruminate or you fixate on it. And there's actually a skill called thought stopping. And so I'm going to go on that on a different PowerPoint presentation, but I just want people to be aware of these are CBT skills, and they can be used to reduce anxiety, because a lot of people feel anxious because they are caught in negative thought patterns. And so distract, relax, and cope is still the saying. It's kind of like stop, drop, and roll, but for counseling. So what we want to do to reduce distress is, first, when you feel triggered by something that's making you feel anxious, distract yourself with tasks and chores, like go clean something, go listen to a podcast, go listen to a book on tape, or do Netflix or something like that. But when you're triggered, instead of engaging with the trigger, try to do something else and not engage with it. Then once you are distracted from the trigger and you're feeling a little bit calmer and better, that's when you try to do something to relax yourself even further. So then you go back to the relaxation slide, which is where you do something that really calms you down even more. And then once you're distracted from the trigger and once you're able to relax, that is coping. So no matter what you do as far as the coping skills you use, once you have used them and things are better, that's it. You're coping. And lastly, I just had a couple things to think about when you're feeling anxious. Questions you can ask yourself: are you catastrophizing? Catastrophizing is when you're kind of making a mountain out of a molehill. So just asking yourself like that: oh, I'm really pissed because I just dropped something on the ground. That's you're basically making it bigger than it is. Forgiving yourself for not handling the situation in an ideal way. I think a lot of people with anxiety tend to be more perfectionistic, and that just doesn't really help. So also practicing radical acceptance is huge. I'm going to do a different presentation on what that is. Accepting that there is a gap between your real self and your ideal self, which for all of us there is. There's the person we want to be, and then there's the person that we are. So just accept that gap. And then ask yourself, what if you're doing, what is going on in your life rather than focusing on what is wrong. So in other words, just saying, what is right about my life right now? Like, what's good? And I think during the pandemic, that's really important. Do you have a roof over your head? Do you have food in your house? Do you feel safe? If the answer is yes, then that's good. Then everything's okay. Thanks for listening to this. If you want to hear more, you can listen on the next PowerPoint.